In the southern region, their forces numbered close to 800, nearing 700 in total. Heroes from various nations had gathered to protect Lytus and Jern, deploying themselves strategically. Among these heroes were the leaders of the Magic Knight Corps. Metal and Oxygen supported Jern. They had learned to create barriers through actual combat, and bore the heavy responsibility of responding immediately to any threats. To protect their comrades, Leon's subordinates took it upon themselves to form the last line of defense. Of course, the heroes who had sworn loyalty to Yaum were equally motivated and determined. Though not organized enough to be called an army, they were a force of elite warriors, each worth 1,000 soldiers. Despite being hastily assembled, they had managed to establish a chain of command, ensuring they weren't lacking in combat strength. Moreover, Ultima's black numbers were stationed in this area. Though fatigued from previous battles, all 200 members understood that complaints were not an option. They were fully committed, diligently recovering their magical energy. "Hey, Khan," Misor called out. "What is it, Misor? Shouldn't we call our subordinates here as well?" Those who have been granted an audience with Lord Geek Crimson would certainly be more capable than the humans over there. Right. They're scattered across the world, but there's still time to gather them. Misor made this judgment with remarkable calm. The cancellation of all strategic operations was unprecedented. Yet, without changing her expression, Misor proceeded to implement her proposal. This alone was proof of Misor's competence and decisiveness. The cold-hearted Misor. She was Rain's most capable confidant. Without her, Rain would have been dismissed as Gee's maid long ago. Incidentally, the only person in this world who could make Misor change her expression was Rain. However, that detail was irrelevant at the moment. Thus, the demon summoning ritual was conducted in secrecy. "We have arrived before our lord." 60 archdemons, each possessing a name, abandoned all other tasks and rushed to the scene. Under normal circumstances, they would be an overwhelming force capable of shaking the world. But now, they were reliable allies. In the northern lands, where their total numbers reached about 500. The terrain was a narrow, mountainous region with towering rock formations, which limited their numbers. However, this constraint also allowed them to concentrate their forces effectively. Surrounding Bacchus and Leonard were nearly 400 Blood Knights, forming the core of their defenses, while also preparing to intercept the enemy with a mobile strike force. Observing the formation of their army, Leonard murmured, "I understand it logically, and I thought I had already accepted it. But to think that I would be protected by monsters, beings we were taught to consider humanity's enemies, especially high-ranking members of the vampire race. To be honest, even now, it still feels unbelievable." It was an honest sentiment that escaped Leonard's lips. Bacchus solemnly nodded in agreement. "Indeed. Even if I were to tell my past self, I would never believe it. After all, the very pope they had once served, Louis, was the leader of these vampire race beings. Whether they believed it or not no longer mattered, yet their instincts resisted accepting it. Nevertheless, it would not affect the current operation. Leonard and the others understood that not all monsters were evil. During their time training in the Tempest, they had shared delicious food and drinks with monsters, forming deep friendships along the way. Their lingering doubts were nothing more than remnants of their old rigid beliefs they now found almost laughable. Even after witnessing all these undeniable truths, they still carried such thoughts in their hearts, and for that, Leonard felt a tinge of self-reproach. That is what it means to be human. Though we may seem unchanged, our thoughts are fickle and ever-shifting. Sometimes for the better, sometimes for the worse, that is the dilemma. Hearing Leonard's words, Gunter consoled him. Even the 7 luminaries had once been true heroes worthy of their title as humanity's guardians. Though they had eventually succumbed to corruption and were destroyed, Gunter still remembered their former glory. Thus, he wished for Leonard and the others to never lose the brilliance of their souls. The 7 great nobles, known as the Transcendents, shared a similar sentiment. Each was determined to guard Bacchus and Leonard. However, while some focused on defensive strategies, 2 individuals, Adalman and Gadra, were eager to engage in battle. Both of them now had unexpectedly handsome appearances, which was unfamiliar to those who had only known them in their skeletal or elderly forms. Surrounding these 2 was a formidable group clad in black uniforms. A force of 100 elite warriors directly under Diablo, the most fearsome unit of the Black Number. Despite being a newcomer, Gadra had taken command of this highly skilled and uniquely troublesome elite corps. Even among an unusual group, their individualities stood out, so regardless of how Adalman or Gadra looked, everyone clearly understood that they were there. Having completed their preparations, the warriors awaited the moment of battle. And at last, the time had come. However, it arrived with a sudden and dreadful despair, as if mocking their thorough preparations. "Kayaha. Let's play, let's play." It was the sound that heralded the end. The warriors heard it echo in their minds, a voice that embodied pure terror. Those who heard that voice instantly understood a difference so vast that the word overwhelming was far too weak to describe it. In that very moment, their fighting spirit was utterly shattered. The land in the east was the first to face this misfortune. The warriors, who had deployed the holy field to prepare for enemy encounters, suddenly found themselves face to face with a child. A small child, out of place on the battlefield. Her face was flat and lacked definition, yet she appeared to be a girl. But there was no time to wonder why she was there. Only 3 among them managed to react in time. Hinata was the first to shout, "Scatter and take cover." She poured her will into the command, praying that even the slightest fraction of a second would make a difference. The moment Hinata laid eyes on Ivarage, her constantly active ultimate skill, King of Fortune, Fortuna revealed to her a vision. A future of despair. She saw a battlefield where the majority of the warriors had turned to dust, and the few survivors lay collapsed on the ground, lingering between life and death. It was a future of despair, nearly impossible to overturn. She had no way of knowing how much her warning would reduce the casualties, but she issued the command with the desperate hope of saving as many as possible. There was no one incompetent enough here to fail to respond. All 600 warriors moved at once. But it was already too late. Kayaha. The world-destroying dragon, Ivarage, unleashed a merciless flash of light. At a speed that seemed to approach relativistic limits, an incomprehensible destructive beam filled the space. The second person to react instantly was Velgrynd. The clone body standing beside Masayuki seamlessly became the main body, unleashing its full power to deploy a protective barrier without delay. It was undeniably unfortunate that the world-destroying dragon, Ivarage, appeared in this area. Had Velgrynd's parallel existence not been present, everything would have ended at that moment. Fortunately, thanks to Hinata's thoughts reaching them just in time, the activation of the protective barrier was successful. However, reality was not so forgiving that they could be saved that easily. Even at full power, Velgrynd was unable to completely block the might of the world-destroying dragon, Ivarage. The aftermath alone was enough to kill most of those present. For mere humans, resisting divine power was impossible. The battlefront collapsed. In an instant, the eastern sector transformed into a hellish landscape. However, at that moment, the third person moved. Awaken. Sanctuary Resurrection. Luminous, who had been observing the battlefield from above, activated the holy magic resurrection, exponentially amplifying its effect by utilizing the mental domains of those who worshipped her in parallel. As a result, the sanctified and expanded magic restored the fallen back to life. Of course, those whose bodies had been completely destroyed could not be revived on the spot. However, thanks to Velgrynd's presence, while the damage was immense, a truly catastrophic outcome had been avoided. Nicholas, who had been maintaining the barrier on the ground, was instantly killed, causing the holy purification barrier to momentarily collapse. However, Hinata quickly re-established it. During that brief moment, Nicholas was resurrected and, as if he had never experienced the agony of death, seamlessly took over the barrier's maintenance from Hinata. It was a testament to Nicholas's determination, not wanting to show an unsightly figure to the woman he revered. Yet, no one had the time to be moved by such a sentimental tale. This resurrection occurred in an instant, but the losses suffered by humanity were immeasurable. Although Luminous managed to keep the number of dead at 0, that didn't necessarily mean they could continue the battle. Someone like Nicholas was an exception. Most others were unable to recover from the sheer terror they had experienced. The Holy Knight Order and the newly formed Imperial Emperor's Guard Knights were all seasoned warriors. Yet, precisely because of that, they could not help but feel an overwhelming sense of dread in the face of such an existence. Many of them had experienced death and resurrection before. Through training in the labyrinth or being revived by Demon Lord Rimuru, they had endured great shocks, but never to the point of complete collapse. However, before the Absolute being known as the world-destroying dragon, Ivarage, their spirits were utterly broken. Losing the will to fight meant losing a battle that could have been won. Even understanding this, no one could move in the face of such despair. It was only natural. After all, even the strongest force among them, the very pillar of their morale, Velgrynd, had suffered severe damage from that last attack. In truth, Velgrynd was on the verge of collapsing and had to be supported by Masayuki. If she had been holding back, things might have been different, but she had already merged all of her alternate bodies. That single strike had been so overwhelming that if Velgrynd had not staked everything to withstand it, this entire front would have been utterly annihilated. Surviving it was a stroke of luck, but there would be no next time. Fufufu. What an unbelievable monster. I have no choice but to admit that I underestimated it. That Velgrynd could still mock herself showed her resilience. But to anyone watching, it was nothing more than a bitter attempt to save face. Even Masayuki, who was supporting Velgrynd, had already half resigned himself to defeat, thinking, this might really be the end. And he wasn't alone, everyone felt the same. What instilled the greatest fear in the warriors, however, was Ivarage's appearance. A child. A mere infant. Which could only mean that it still had room to grow, an idea too terrifying to ignore. Even now, they were nearly uncontrollable, and if they became any stronger, such fears took hold of them. Everyone had the same thought. Is there even a point in continuing to fight when it's already hopeless? And yet, the battle raged on. From the skies in the eastern front down to the battlefield, the cryptid forces that had successfully escaped the Holy Field were now clashing with the Pegasus Knights, led by King Gazel. They had taken up the fight in place of those who could no longer move, but this meant that their precious reserves were being spent right from the start. From the very moment the battle began, they had been plunged into an overwhelmingly disadvantageous situation, yet humanity had not lost. Even in the face of despair, they had not abandoned hope. Luminous, as a goddess, commanded them. Do not give up. Even if you die, I shall resurrect you, so cast away your fear and face the enemy. Hinata followed suit. That's right. Rather than giving up and dying miserably here, I would rather fight until the end as a warrior, with pride. You all feel the same way, don't you? Her words resonated in the hearts of the warriors. The fighting spirit that had nearly been extinguished was barely reignited. Roused by this, Calgureo shouted his rallying cry. Listen. Our goddess has put herself on the line to protect us. Even if we all combined our strength, we could not match her power. There was not a single soldier in the Eastern Empire who remained unmoved by these words. They all understood they were being protected by the mercy of their goddess, Velgrynd. And now, they had experienced her blessing firsthand. If they could not be inspired by this, they would be nothing more than weaklings unworthy of standing on this battlefield. It no longer mattered if their enemy embodied despair itself. Even if they were to be annihilated, the Imperial soldiers would not retreat. Watching this transformation in the humans, Tensura's confidant, Sien, burst into laughter. Ha. Ha ha ha. Exactly. That's exactly right. If Tensura-sama were to witness you in such a disgraceful state. That was all that needed to be said. Even before Sien could finish his sentence, 200 members of the Black Numbers stood up. Their posture was perfectly straight. And then, with a glint of murderous intent directed at the cryptids, they courageously resumed the fight. Thus, the human side also regained their momentum. Even if they were destined for defeat, they rallied themselves to struggle until the very end. And so, the long despair finally reached the moment of a new beginning.